Hey everyone, welcome back to day 2 of First 3 Prayer and Fasting for the month of August. In part 1, the series, we went over the fact that God calls us to fast, and there can be a lot of hang-ups in this area. The first hang-up that we can potentially run into is not knowing that fasting isn't optional. It's a direction from the Lord. The next hang-up would be knowing that even while we know we are called to fast, sometimes that we just don't actually know the mechanics of how to fast or even when to do it, which isn't a problem. The Lord shows us many examples in His Word on how to fast. In part 1, we mentioned 3 different examples of fasting. The first was Daniel, who fasted for a set number of days, and not from all food, but specific foods. He chose to eat nothing delectable or tasty, no meat or sweets or wine, basically just fruits and veggies and water. He denied his flesh from consuming pleasant food as he prayed and sought answers from the Lord, which in fact he received. The second example that we talked about was the story of Esther, which compares pretty closely, if not the most closely, to what we are doing as a church during our first 3 each month. Esther called her fellow Jews to a corporate fast. So they all fasted and petitioned God together, united towards the same purpose in their fasting and prayer. And the third example was the story of the father with the demon-possessed son. And the father in this story was facing a battle in his own life, and Jesus explained that fasting and prayer is needed in order to bring breakthrough in certain situations that we face. This shows us that when we are facing things in our lives personally, that we can seek God in fasting and prayer individually. We of course also have Jesus' example of fasting from all but water in the wilderness. Jesus separated himself from distractions by going off on his own to seek the Lord. And we also discussed in our last episode that with the onslaught of media distractions there are today, that setting aside media can be considered a fast, and it can be something that we deny our flesh in order to set time aside to pursue the Lord in prayer. And while having this knowledge of how to fast, it's always good to seek the Lord as to what type of fast He is leading you to undertake, and of course for how long. The next biggest hang-up that we can run into is one that's not talked about much, if at all, and it's something that I've dealt with myself. There are people who have the grace to fast. It comes more naturally to them. Maybe it's a God-given gift, or maybe it's just because of practice, but for many, fasting can be difficult. And many of us find ourselves having to learn to fast through failure. Don't forget that part of the need to fast is subduing our flesh, and our flesh can be strong. But the Lord brought this verse to me recently, and it resonates with me in many ways, but also in the area of learning to fast through failure. Hebrews 7:11 says, "Now if perfection had been attainable through the Levitical priesthood, for under it the people received the law, what further need would there have been for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, rather than one named after the order of Aaron?" This verse, dumbed down, says, if it were possible for people to be perfect, what need would there have been for Jesus to come? The answer is, Jesus was always God's plan for us. The law was never intended to measure our ability to be perfect. The law was meant to distinguish God from sin in His perfection. God knows that we aren't perfect. He knows that we need grace, and He does see our every effort to do what He calls us to do, even when we fail. Truly, the act of getting up and trying again is pleasing to the Lord. Some things just take practice. Don't forget that the process of becoming more like Jesus is a journey, and God does not expect you to run before you can walk. Philippians 4:13 says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Believe that. Peter walked on top of water as long as he was looking at Jesus. If we focus our eyes and our attention wholly on the Lord as we fast, He will give you the strength to succeed. Also, remember 1 John 4:4, which says, "Greater is He who is in me than he who is in the world." Don't allow the enemy to make you feel condemned when you fail a fast. The enemy doesn't want you to get back up and try again, because fasting produces blessing, and it's also a powerful tool in tearing down the enemy's plans for us. Fast until you succeed, and God will build on those successes. Don't let past failure or difficulty deter you from doing something that is so powerful to change things and produce goodness along our journeys with Christ. Remember that participating in a fast is pursuing obedience to the Lord. There is always good to come from obedience to God. So regardless of any of the possible hang-ups that you might be facing, be encouraged. This week, take some time to be intentional and shut out distractions around you, and dedicate some time to pray and fast. God bless.